this thing, I think, works pretty well. Can everyone hear, like in the back? Is it okay? Yeah. Cool. Thanks for coming out tonight, everybody. We're going to have a pretty packed house, it looks like. We're talking about Node 6, so I assume a lot of people here are Node developers. Raise your hand if you're actively developing on Node. Raise your hand if you're not. So you guys must be just interested in sort of learning more about it. Cool, so a little bit of a mixed crowd. Well, Evan will tell us all about that here in a little bit, and I'm looking forward to that myself. I'm actually on Node 4 myself right now, so I'm interested in hearing about 6 as well. So for those of you, I know we tend to get a lot of new people each month, and I saw a lot of new people signing up on the meetup this month. And so for those of you who are new, my name is Brian Mosque. Corey Butler right here is my co-organizer, and this is Bleeding Edge Web. So we basically like to talk about anything and everything that we think would be interesting to web app developers. So every month we talk about different frameworks, different languages, just anything that we think would be interesting basically to people like us. So that's our shtick. A few announcements. Number one, did anyone park here in the building in the parking garage? So if you did, make sure you speak to the person at the front desk and get a little validation card so that the parking's only $5, because otherwise it could be like 20 or 25 when you try to leave. Because I made that mistake once. Also, we're always on the lookout for people who are interested in speaking. Sponsors, help.com sponsored us this month, and I'll give them a shout out here in just a second. We're also, anyone who's interested in doing lightning talks, so we're going to have one lightning talk that Corey's going to give later this evening. But lightning talks are great. You may not have a 30 to 45-minute presentation, but you may have some topic that's interesting to you, or you may work on an open source project, or anything that would be good for just a little 5-minute chat. So if that sounds interesting to you, come up and talk to us afterwards. We're always looking for folks to do that. And before I move on, before we get started, actually, do I have any announcements from you guys? And is anyone hiring, for example, or are you a developer looking for a job? Anything like that? Yeah. Well, I know you guys are hiring. I'll give you a chance in just a second. Anyone else? Yeah, in the back. Yeah. Did you say you are a developer?
Yes.
Yeah, so what skill do you have and what are you looking for?
Sorry, I'm a Node developer. I work in React, Angular, Express, basically JavaScript. I know SQL, Postgres mostly.
Okay, so that's a good summary. So a Node developer with front-end skills as well, if anyone's looking to hire someone like that, check him out. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm Caitlin with OnFront, and we're looking for React experience or a wide variety of JavaScript framework experience because we're client web consulting firm startup here in Austin, and so a lot of our clients are working with near developers, so hiring on front end.
So Caitlin is looking to hire front-end developers. Yeah, Ryan.
So I've got opportunities for Angular.js. You know what promises do and what they? If you don't know what the Pyramid of Doom is, never mind. And then we're looking for full stack Microsoft stack-based programmers who would be able to handle things like CQRS and messaging.
So to,
Sorry? I have my own small company. My client is Northwest.
so Ryan here is looking to hire Angular developers, and I think to paraphrase an old saying, if you don't know about the Pyramid of Doom, then you've probably already entered it, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. We want Indiana Jones.
all right. Okay, anyone else? Yeah.
Hi, I'm a React or front-end developer, best with React, bit of a generalist. Also go full stack and Node, Sinatra, a few other things. Looking to join a slightly more established team.
Okay, so another Node React developer. Did I see a hand back there? Or no? Yeah.
My name is Grant Rostig, and I design databases for people who still believe that you have to design a database. I also do auto-scaling stuff on Amazon using
So a database slash infrastructure AWS person looking for contracting type work. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hey, my name is Chris Bodie. I'm full stack JavaScript developer, also with experience Ruby on Rails. More of a bias for the front end. So looking to join a team. We can collaborate and make good stuff.
Cool. So another front end developer looking for work. Anyone else? A lot of announcements this month. Yeah, in the back.
I've only been here twice, so I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'm just an amateur. I do PHP, and I'm trying to find some people to mess around with doing PHP. I made this really crude search engine. It's really crappy and slow, but it's kind of cool. And if anybody's into PHP, hit me up after the
Okay, so a PHP kind of hobbyist, it sounds like, maybe looking to hook up for side projects. Okay? And I'll mention, by the way, while we're on this topic, we do have a Slack channel, and that's actually a great use for that kind of stuff as well. Like if you're just looking to sort of, loosely hook up with people or just see what's going on, hop on Slack, and we've got a couple of channels where people discuss random stuff like that. Was there someone else?
Over there.
Yeah.
I just graduated and looking for a job. I have most experience in Ruby on Rails, mostly front end. Slowly getting more experience through my internship into more of the back end. And I'd like to hear from someone. That would be great.
Okay, so a new graduate Ruby on Rails experience. All right, anything else? And also, I'll just throw that out right now before I forget. We also usually go to Buffalo Billiards afterwards, which is also a great time to like hook up if someone said something interesting just now. Try to find them and see if you can hook up later. Also, we just like to chill out and talk about whatever is interesting and have a beer. So if anyone's just interested in doing that, we'll do that right after the meetup. And it's right on at the block over on 6th and Brazos. Okay, I think that's all the announcements, so I'm going to jump right into it. News from the Bleeding Edge. So first off, thanks to Capital Factory for giving us this space every month. We really appreciate that. And our main sponsor this month is Help.com. So basically the huge contingent of purple t-shirts here in the middle.
That's blue.
Okay.
Mine's black.
So thank you guys for the pizza. Really appreciate that. If we could have a hand for them. And you guys wanted to mention something about yourselves.
Yeah, just wanted to thank everybody for coming tonight. Help.com, we're a startup here downtown in Austin, Texas, and we're looking for jobs in the Node space. Definitely love to talk to you. But essentially, we're a growing team of creative thinkers, entrepreneurs, and engineers building next generation customer service software. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, we're committed to Node, we're committed to open source, and yeah, we'd love to talk to you. So thanks for having us.
And I'm sure Evan will mention it himself, but Evan, our main speaker, he's actually, he works with Help.com as well. And he's talking about Node because he's on the Node Technical Committee and obviously knows a lot about Node. So they have some pretty cool folks there to work with. So thanks again, Help.com. We really do appreciate it. And let's jump right into it. So we always like to start off with the browser update. Being mostly probably web app developers in this room, the browser is where we tend to live and breathe every day. So it's good to keep on top of what's going on there. So last month at the meetup, these were the most current browser versions. Does anyone have any guesses as to which ones have updated since then? Just anyone shout it out if you think you know one. Chrome? That's a good one because Chrome just updated today, actually. Anyone else? So Firefox actually has not updated yet. It's in beta. It will be updating soon, but it has not updated yet. But Opera, Chrome, and Edge is a tricky one because their version numbers are all screwed up. But we'll talk about them in just a minute. But they did have an update. So this is actually a pretty good example of why we call this bleeding edge web. If you can see the little graphic at the bottom. So I was telling some of these guys earlier, I was already finished with my slides for today, and earlier, about 2 in the afternoon, I was just sort of checking Twitter, and I saw that Chrome actually updated today, like 5 hours ago, and so I had to go and add this slide real quick, and I actually checked my own Chrome, and when I pulled it up, it said version 50 updating, like right when I checked it. So talk about bleeding edge, right? That's pretty good timing there. So They've actually added a few interesting things just today. So the Credentials Management API is an API that essentially allows the browser to tap into the underlying credentials store and enable things like one-click login. And it can integrate with third-party login, like the whole OAuth login flow that you go to Facebook and come back, that kind of stuff. So it integrates into all that and makes it much easier in general, but especially for the mobile use case. It's supposed to greatly simplify things, hopefully, in the browser where you can just have one tap login. So that's pretty cool. And they've got a simple API for that. They've also, this is a performance improvement, this feature where they're going to skip rendering. And if you're familiar with request animation frame, that's the built-in browser API for knowing when the browser is sort of available to animate a frame of action. And they're basically introducing this primarily for like ads, for example, that might be below the fold that today can harm performance when as soon as the page loads, even things that are off screen, making calls to some ad server to load images and all kinds of stuff that slows your page down. Well, now in the new version, they're going to cut that out and only allow those things to run when they're actually visible. So that's going to be a nice performance improvement, especially on mobile. The Intersection Observer API is pretty cool. So that's something where if you want to know when a particular element on your page is actually in view and when it passes into and out of view, that's an API that gives that to you. And the reason that's important is because today, really the only way to do that is to set up pretty expensive code to kind of listen for scroll events and do things that are kind of hard to do today and not as performant. And a really good use case for that, for example, is dynamically loading images when they're close to scrolling into view, for example, stuff like that. So very useful. Passive event listeners is something primarily for mobile, again, that helps scroll performance so that if you know, for example, that you don't have to listen for a tap on specific elements while things are scrolling, you can set things up as passive listeners, then they won't interrupt scrolling and they'll still work. So that's useful, and actually lots of other stuff, more minor stuff, so definitely check that out. Check out the release notes for that. Opera wasn't super interesting. As we talk about, Opera is based on Chromium. And so a lot of their releases nowadays from the developer perspective are really just about adopting the most recent version of Chromium as their engine. And so their release was to update to the previous version of Chrome. And then they added a couple of little minor things, but nothing too interesting from that perspective. So Edge is kind of tricky because the other evergreen browsers, even though they update regularly, they all change their major version numbers. Well, Edge is kind of annoying in that it doesn't really change major version numbers. And one of the constraints Edge has that the other ones don't is that it actually tracks with the Windows operating system. So all the version numbering gets kind of tied up with that and it gets confusing. And so what you have to watch for is their build numbers. And the other thing about it is that Edge doesn't necessarily just push out all their builds publicly the same way that Chrome and Firefox do. It kind of depends on what version of Windows you're on, if you're on Windows Insider versus whatever. And I'm not really a Windows guy. So the way I'm going to approach it is just the most current stuff that's not necessarily available to everyone in the world, but it is available to people on certain builds of Windows. And the stuff that's, quote, new is really just the stuff that they've added in builds since the last time we talked about it. So I know that's all confusing, but basically, the good thing about this is that if you guys remember, which we used to talk about all the time with IE, it never changed, right? It changed every 3 to 5 years. And so the good thing is they actually are making lots of changes. I think they had 5 or 6 builds in the last month since we talked about it, which is great. So since then, they've added lots of new APIs for web notifications. Beacon is an API that basically allows you to asynchronously post data in a way that you sort of offload the responsibility of posting it to the browser. And it's really useful for stuff where you don't necessarily care how long it takes or what the response is. So a good example of that would be, for example, like analytics. So a page loads, you want to fire off some analytics call, and you can just defer that to the browser and let the browser sort of background it and take care of it on its own. So that's kind of useful for certain use cases. And then fetch is becoming the new sort of, it's replacing the old XML HTTP request object for doing asynchronous requests from the browser. So that's kind of the new standard for that. They've added a bunch of new ES 2015 stuff. And they're actually kind of ahead of the game with ES 2016 and even a few 2017 features, which that spec hasn't even been, finalized yet, and they're already adding some of that kind of stuff. So, I won't go into all these details. We don't have time for that. But as you can see, they've been very busy. Actually, I will mention the support for WOFF 2.0. If you're not familiar with that, that's the web fonts standard. And this new version basically adds a lot of performance improvements that Google came up with for improving the compression and stuff to make the fonts download faster. So that's actually a pretty useful one. So again, a lot of stuff in this release. If you haven't been keeping track of it, definitely you should take a look at that, see what's new. And anyone who's standing up, there is other seating up here if you are interested in sitting. It's up to you. So a little bonus slide. Safari did not update Safari, the public release, but what they're doing right now is they have a technology preview, which is actually a completely separate download. It's a separate browser install, but it's their version of kind of a canary build, essentially. And again, very exciting that they have actually updated this several times since the last time we talked about it, which is pretty awesome. Because Safari was kind of the one lingering browser, once Edge came out, then Safari was sort of the last standing browser that wasn't doing anything. But it seems like they've finally kind of gotten past that, and they're adding a bunch of good fixes and improvements. So again, I'm actually not going to go into this one because most of the improvements were fairly incremental things. There weren't any major new features, but there were a lot. And so it's actually kind of interesting to see how busy they've been. So again, I think I mentioned this in the last meetup, but I'm looking very forward to the next revision of OS X, which usually Safari major versions come out with the operating system, which tend to come out in the fall. So hopefully in the next few months, we'll have a version of Safari that is pretty much on par with everything else. And that's kind of what this slide is about. So just a real brief update on WebKit, which is of course the underlying engine that Safari uses. WebKit was actually the first JavaScript engine it's not a JavaScript engine, but the first, one of these browser engines basically that reached 100% compliance with ES6 / ES 2015. So yeah, actually, I would clap for that for sure. Because again, Safari was the one that, as of, I don't know, not too long ago, a few months back, Safari was at like 50% or maybe even less than that. So they've really quickly started catching up to everyone else, which is fantastic. Okay, a quick review of some notable libraries and frameworks. Who here uses Babel in some form or another? Probably a lot of Node developers. So Babel has actually had a couple of important releases just in the last month. So probably the most important thing that they've done is they've actually upgraded Babel 6 to compile itself, which they weren't doing before. And the reason that's important is because under Babel 5, I don't know the exact technical reasons, but under NPM, they were not able to deduplicate the Babel libraries. And so when you installed other things that actually used Babel as a dependency, you got all kinds of duplicated installations of Babel within your NPM tree. And depending on what libraries you use, that could be a lot of extra code. So that's one of the main things that they fixed in this new version of Babel. So now Babel itself uses Babel 6, and so that problem goes away, and so it's much more efficient with NPM. And they've also updated some of their internal libraries. So definitely, if you haven't updated Babel in a while, you should look at that. Angular 2.0, the long awaited Angular 2.0. Do we have any Angular developers here? A few. So you guys are probably more excited about this than I am. I'm not an Angular developer myself, but this is pretty big news because this has been sort of, people have been waiting for this for quite a while. And in fact, as I was looking at the previous versions to make this slide, I saw that they had done 17 beta versions of Angular 2, and now they're on RC 1 or 2. So I don't know, 17 beta versions. I'm not sure how many release candidates that translates into, hopefully not too many. But this is obviously a massive, massive change. They basically rewrote large parts of Angular. They split it up and made it completely modular. It's a huge upgrade. So if you're in that world already, I'm sure you're well aware of it. But if you're not, and if it's, if you're looking at frameworks right now, or if you looked at Angular 1 and weren't too keen on it, this might be a good time to look at Angular now that they're pretty close to 2.0.
If you really miss Silverlight.
Silverlight? Did you say Silverlight?
Silverlight 3.0.
Yeah, I should go back and add that. NativeScript 2.0. How many people here use NativeScript? No one. How many have heard of it? A few. So I have not used it either, but it's popped up on my radar a few times, and it seems kind of interesting. You might dismiss it if you're familiar with Telerik. Telerik has been around forever and kind of made their name as a old school Microsoft component developer. So the name Telerik doesn't sort of sound cool and modern, but the framework actually does look pretty interesting. So again, I would say if you're in the market for a new framework right now that specifically does the whole JavaScript-based compile to native thing like React Native and like Ionic, which are the two big players, these guys definitely don't have the same name, but it's a very similar type of toolkit and it looks pretty interesting. So you might check that out if you're looking for that kind of. And the one notable thing I would say is that being backed by Telerik, they do have paid support options, which is important to some companies. So that is one thing that kind of sets them apart. Electron 1.0, how many people use Electron? So quite a few. Electron is really cool. If you're not familiar with it, it's basically a way to use all the tools that we're talking about, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and be able to deploy all that as a desktop app. So if that sounds interesting to you, you should definitely check it out. It just went 1.0, which is a great milestone for them. And in fact, let me see if I still have this running. I actually installed their little demo, if I can remember which tab it's in. I have too many tabs going on. Oh yeah, this is it. So this is, so they have this repo that you can clone for their demo app. And so I literally didn't do anything other than git clone, npm install, and now I'm going to run npm start. And up pops this native app. So this is native OS X Chrome. And what's cool about this is it's basically a demo of the APIs that you can use. So for example, this is one that's visual. So you can click this and you get the little native window. So nothing too fancy, but pretty cool. Oh, JavaScript error. Okay, pay no attention to that. But the thing that's cool about that is, that's like literally 3 steps, and I had an up and running app with source code that I could play around with. So, if you were ever sort of interested in this, but maybe thought the barrier to entry was too high or looked too confusing, super easy to just download that, get started with it. They've also introduced some new things for debugging and for integration testing. So very, very cool tool set if you haven't messed with that yet. jQuery 3.0, another one that has been talked about for a long time, but has now finally hit release candidate status. So a lot of stuff, if you use jQuery, this is definitely one to take a look at now because there are a few breaking changes, not too many, but there are a few. They do offer an upgrade guide, and the way they talk about it, basically going forward, jQuery 3.0 will be the only version of jQuery. So if you're on 1 or 2, aside from critical fixes, they're not going to have anything else added to them. So if you're a heavy jQuery user, you definitely will want to look at 3.0. So then a few sort of random things that have popped up in the last month that are interesting. How many people have heard of Reason, the new framework out of Facebook? Wow, not too many. So this is kind of interesting. It's the reason a lot of you probably haven't heard of it is because it's definitely different. It's based on OCaml, which is a language that's actually been around for quite a long time, but most of us probably aren't too familiar with it. I mean, I've never used it. It's an interesting language, though, and this is actually what the guy who was the main developer behind React and React Native, he hasn't been doing that stuff for a while. It turns out he's been working on this. So it's the same guy. It's developed out of Facebook. And the way they describe it, it basically resembles the good parts of JavaScript. And so what they've done is they've taken OCaml, which is a compiled language, so it has the whole sort of compiler toolchain that you would expect in that world. And they've inserted a step into that process where they've kind of customized the syntax parsing. So you can basically write a new syntax that sits on top of OCaml, but still leverages things like type inference and all the type checking that it does, and some other cool features that it has. And so, and I linked to this this page here. So if this sounds at all interesting to you, you should check it out. They've got a page that actually compares it syntactically to vanilla JavaScript to see what the differences are. The reason it's kind of interesting is because, the benefits of this are it's a type-safe language. It has its output to native binaries, so it's fast, it's native. And so, there are a lot of languages that do that, but if you're not already sort of in that world, and if you get to a point where you're looking for something that maybe has to compile to native, if you're not already in the C world or in some other language that can do that, this might be an interesting one to look at because the sort of developer ergonomics of it are very similar to what we're used to as like JavaScript, React type developers, a lot of us. So if you're in the JavaScript Node world and this sounds interesting to you, you should definitely check it out. And Facebook actually uses it already for some of their own products as well. So this is one, Evan, I don't know, you could probably speak to this more possibly, because I think I think you posted this, which is why I saw it. So basically, one thing, if you're a Node developer for a long time, you've probably been begging for sort of better integrated debugging support. There are solutions for debugging Node, but just being able to have Chrome Inspector up and running and be able to step through code would be awesome. Well, there's an open PR now that is all about adding that. So it's still open as of the last time I checked, but it's basically exactly that, the ability to sort of hook Chrome DevTools into Node and be able to set breakpoints, step through your code, do all that fun stuff. So definitely keep an eye on that one if that sounds interesting to you. And then this one is sort of a random little library that I ran across, but I found it interesting, and it's something that I actually could have used myself in the past. If you have any need for natural language processing, which is being able to take sort of natural language text and parse it and make sense of it in various interesting ways, there's this library called NLP Compromise. So again, I know that won't apply to many people, but if it does apply to you, this one is pretty cool, so you should check it out. Now for something completely different. If you ever find yourself needing to write a website that is based on the Star Wars intro crawl, there is now a CSS library just for you. And so I'll show you a little demo. This is their site, the way it loads up. And there you go. No JavaScript. This is 100% CSS. Select the text. So probably the most important thing that I talked about today, right there. It actually does, you can click, that's a link. So this is actually part of their whole page here. Yeah, pretty cool stuff right there. So, Node 6 is interesting and all, but. Okay, real quick, last thing I've got, a few upcoming events. So there's a hackathon that is centered around benefiting the community, specifically the Austin community, and it's coming up here in a few weeks. And there's a site that I linked to for project proposals, so you can actually browse and see what people have proposed and see if anything sounds interesting to you, something you might want to work on. So kind of a cool event for a good cause, so if that sounds interesting, go sign up for that. And then Maker Square is offering a course. We actually linked to them last month. This is the same course, but offered again, starting in June. So if you are not as technical of a person, maybe, or if you're looking to switch careers, or for any reason you're sort of just wanting to get into some of these technologies that we're talking about, they have the perfect class for you right there. And so if that sounds interesting to you at all, this is actually a referral link on there. We're not trying to make huge amounts of money, but any money we do make goes right back into the meetup. So if you're interested, definitely use that link for us and help us out. And that's all I've got. So any questions or comments on that before I turn it over to Evan? Yeah.
I just found something kind of interesting for anybody that didn't hear about it. One of the more interesting library names came out from Google for the natural language processing called Parsey McParseface.
Actually, I saw that and I forgot to mention it. Does everyone know about Bodie McBoatface? Yeah. Well, look it up. I'm not going to tell you about it, but it's a funny story. So yeah, then Google came out with Parsey McParseface, which is just awesome. So cool. Anything else? All right, so we'll have Evan come up and tell us about Node 6. Thanks.
And sorry, I walked here and I've been sweating uncontrollably since. So. Is there a microphone?
It's right overhead.
Okay. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Cool. I'm Evan. Thanks for having me. Tonight we're going to talk about Node 6. It's been really exciting, for me anyways. But just going to tell you about me. I work at help.com. Woo! I knew I forgot something. I'm sorry. Co-working? Yeah. There you go. Cool. There we go. So yeah, I'm an engineer at help.com. I focus mainly on Node services and like tooling, things like that. We like to automate stuff, so it's a lot of fun. And then I'm on the Core Technical Committee for Node, as well as the release team. So actually get to cut some of the releases. I cut version 6.2 last week. Really interesting process, and it's cool seeing like the different things that we have to go through to make sure that people get their Node binaries. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun. We're always looking for help too. I'll get more into that. So with Node 6, we've got better ES 2015 support. Is that better this time, Corey? Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Last time I had ES 6, and apparently that wasn't right. So everybody here probably uses Babel, so I know you know what default parameters and stuff are. But I just took these like straight from Node.green. Can you even see it? No. Yeah, that literally does nothing. See if I can zoom. There we go. Okay. Default parameters.
Oh, by the way, you can put this thing up here to make it a little easier on yourself. There you go.
Thanks.
Yep.
See, I mean, it's pretty much all. We pulled in the V8 from Chrome 50 in Node version 6. So pretty much everything that works in Chrome 50 works on the Node side as far as like pure JavaScript features go. So along with that, REST parameters are no longer behind the flag. Yeah, these are just basic. They're taken straight from Node.green. So Node.green is a site that gives you this information, but in a table. Here, I'll pull it up. It shows you on a like version by version basis. So the nightly 7.0, that's like the master branch that we have, and we have one that builds every night that we can also trigger them manually. And then 6.2 is the latest version 6, and it's sitting. Let's see, that has the flags on it. So without flags, we're sitting at about 92 to 93% of the ES6 features. Everybody keeps asking, or ES 2015. Everybody keeps asking, so are native modules like ES 2015 modules going to be in Node version 6? More than likely, no. The reason for that is spec actually defined the syntax, but not the semantics for loading those modules. So we're still trying to figure that out. Bradley Meck, I think it's Ferris now. He has been working tirelessly. He actually is local here, but he's been working tirelessly on getting the modules into Node Core and making that natively supported. We're probably not going to see him until Node 7, which will be coming out in October. And that would be at the earliest, but just going to give you a heads up on that. You can see the difference, to version 5. There's a lot of red on version 5 there. And one of the major things now is using block scoping in sloppy mode. So like if you don't have use strict at the top of your file, that's a pretty big change. Block scoping now works in sloppy mode in Node 6, whereas it didn't in 5 and below. Or for most things. There are still a few here and there that are not supported, but overall, most of the ES 2015 features are supported in Node 6. And destructuring. Everybody loves destructuring.
Yeah.
It literally just makes code less readable to me, but whatever floats your boat, right? I don't know how that's more readable, but it's here. Okay, so let's get into the deep stuff. How many people are using Node in production? Come on, let's make this interactive. Last time I was like Desert Doornail, it was horrible. So y'all work with me. Are y'all running at least 4 to 5? Anybody running 5? Yay. I like 5 too. The differences between version 4 and version 6 are pretty large because the differences between version 5 and version 6 are pretty large. There were a lot of breaking changes in that upgrade. Some we're still dealing with, but one of the most, I just try to put some more notable ones together. Buffer, this was kind of like the left pad issue without NPM. But yeah, we have deprecated the buffer API, or the constructor. It's supposed to use buffer.from, buffer.alloc, or buffer.alloc unsafe. And alloc unsafe and alloc, the main difference there is alloc unsafe does not zero fill your buffers, whereas buffers weren't zero filled in the first place. So that would be like using the buffer constructor with a number as the argument. Alloc actually does zero fill the buffers now. And then buffer.from should be used for things like an array buffer. There's a bunch of different stuff that you can pass in, but things like that. On the cluster side, we actually decided to deprecate the worker suicide property, just because it wasn't that descriptive. It didn't really do what it said, and people came to us. They were like, "Hey, this offends me." So I don't know. I was pretty excited about that we were able to take community input, but we've renamed that to worker.exited after disconnect. So Java's back. We removed the free list module. It was supposed to be internal only, so it kind of made sense to go ahead and get rid of it. Now path, this is one that actually I noticed less broke from the path changes, but any arguments that are not strings, an error gets thrown in path now in version 6. So definitely something to keep in mind. Deprecated process.event emitter. It's ancient, like 0.2 days, something like that. The biggest notable one that I've noticed, this actually affected code that I had, was query string. So query string.parse would return an object before. That object inherited from object.prototype, so it had has own property and different methods that are on the prototype that you sometimes come to expect. Well, now that prevented something. Sorry, you could not have a property in the query string that was __proto__. So now we are creating that object for using object.createNull, and what that means is you have none of the object methods are on that. So if you need to check if your query string object that comes back has a property, then you'd have to use object.prototype has a property call on that object. So that one actually broke some of our code, which really if you're using has own property, your code's gonna be broken regardless. So Oh, URL resolve. This one was pretty cool. So before, if you resolve URL and the host changes and there's auth information, the auth information stayed. Not the best thing. So we got that fixed in version 6 as well. Now down at the bottom, I've got a list of the changes, all of the breaking changes. It's really long. I'm talking really long. And this is just from 5 to 6. So if you want to see, like, if you're upgrading from 4, then, which I would definitely recommend, like, starting to test now, because that's how we get to a stable Node 6. Let's see, where is it? There's a breaking change page. Yeah, so you can see 4 to 5 right here. This is all in the wiki on the Node GitHub repository. So. I finally switched from Keynote, so I'm still trying to figure it out.
Hey, quick question on that last slide.
Sure.
So obviously it sounds like process.event emitter is not related to just the event emitter class itself, like inheriting from that.
No. So when the event emitter first came out, it was you accessed it by using like process.event emitter. Since now it's its own module, core module, you want to require it. We're trying to not throw any extra garbage onto process because it's getting really popular. There's things that have been added, like you can now get the CPU usage, which is great. But if you console.log process in Node, it's like same thing as window. It's horrible. But yeah. And y'all please feel free to interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll just keep rambling. So versioning. This is like the most confusing part about Node, seriously. We have 0.10, which is great, has been around for a really long time. Can y'all see this? Okay, cool. So it's in maintenance mode right now. If you're on 0.10, please move off of it. Please upgrade. We're not getting anything but security fixes, which it's running a really, really old V8. I would definitely recommend getting off it. It actually, end of life is October of this year. So if you're, definitely recommend that. 0.12 is December of this year, is when it in EOLs, I guess. But I don't know, if you're running 0.12, I would probably recommend upgrading before that. I had a lot of trouble with 0.12. The active LTS release is version 4. You're going to be good until April 2018, but it's already outdated. We are tracking every major version is tracking whatever stable V8. And V8's the JavaScript engine for Chrome. Sorry, I didn't mention that before. But so, like when version 6 came out, V8 50 or V8 5.0, which is Chrome 50, had just gone stable. And so that's what we landed in version 6. Now, typically what we've done is when a new version of V8 comes out, and we're in the middle of like a release cycle, so we're in the middle of version 6 right now. So we wouldn't have been able to upgrade V8, like major version, or no, it's V8 minor versions that we track. So V8 5 would stay with Node version 6. Yeah. It's going to get really confusing when we get to Node version 8. I'm just saying, V8, you know. But yeah, so what we're going to try and do is come up with a way to prevent there being like ABI incompatibilities and see if we can still bump V8 without having to bump the major Node version. That would be huge, because then, you know, like if you're still using Node 10, then we wouldn't have to be sitting on an old V8. I don't know if that's going to happen this go around, but I know that there are people that are actively working on it. It'll be interesting to see. But version 5 is not LTS. So if you're using version 5 in production, I would recommend like getting your stuff on version 6, testing it, getting ready for it to go LTS. Because version 5 is going to stop getting updates in 2 months or so. Like, period. I mean, if there's some major security issues, yeah, we'll update those, but we're not actively cherry picking in commits like we are for version 6 and version 4. So definitely recommend starting that migration path from version 5 as soon as possible and at least testing on it. Yes?
What's LTS mean?
Long-term support, I think, is what it technically means. But we're kind of taking the Ubuntu path. The things like we have 2 major releases every year. So
Hey Evan.
Yep.
You're on the CTC, you said, right?
yes,
So are you on those the phone calls that they have every Wednesday? I think?
yes,
You are? Okay.
yeah, we had it today.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fun. All right, so what version should I use? That's like the hardest problem when you start using Node is like, I don't know what version to use. And then you npm install something and it doesn't work. And we're trying to make that better. And actually, I think Corey's going to talk about something that's going to make that easier tonight. But if you're on version 5, like I said, get to version 6. That is the goal. Because when you're testing version 6, then you can tell us when something breaks. And then we can fix it for you. That's like our top priority is getting version 6 to an LTS ready state, as well as maintaining version 4 and keeping it, nothing breaking, slipping in there. But yeah, if you're on version 5, just start getting on version 6 as soon as you can. If you're on version 4, you're good. I know a lot of people are itching to start using these new features. But yeah, I mean, depends on if you want to use Babel or not. Version 0.10 or 0.12, please upgrade as soon as you can. So there are still some issues with version 6.
Evan,
Yes.
so why is version 5 like no man's land?
Version 5 was what was considered a stable release, which doesn't make as much sense to me, but that's what we decided on. And what we're doing is odd version numbers or are going to be in a stable state for 6 months, I believe it is. Let me pull up the map. Yeah, 6 months. No, 9 months, I'm sorry. So every odd version will be the stable. It's been renamed to current as of version 6, but it'll be in that state for 9 months. And if it's odd, no more support is added because we will then at that point have the version above it going to LTS. The version below it will still be in LTS for another 3 years or 2 years, if I recall correctly. So this is actually the LTS repo, and that's the great thing about like how Node has progressed over the past year is we now have this out in the open. We know like, hey, this is when we're going to release this. It's not like version 0.12 is going to drop next week, and then it takes 4 years, you know? But, yeah. So when V6 goes LTS, V7 will become current, and V4 will still be LTS until it goes into maintenance mode 4 months after. So this is the LTS repo. Definitely recommend giving that a look, especially if you got stuff that you're not able to update. I know there are a lot of organizations that are not able to update their systems once they have them in place near as often, not doing the deploy every day thing and all that. So yeah, check that out. So current issues with Node 6. This is the biggest one. A lot of people have been seeing issues with it, but there was a change in libuv. libuv is like the cross-platform library that sits under Node, and it abstracts away like network access, things like TCP, UDP, also file system abstraction to make it easy to work on like Macs, Linux, Windows, things like that. Well, there was a bug fixed in libuv that we pulled into Node 6 that introduced a regression. I'm gonna call it a regression because we thought that that change had already been made for Mac. But what it was is that Macs have a buffer of, was it kilobyte, I think, when it flushes to the terminal. And so we made this change, and it made writing to standard out and standard error non-blocking. So what that means, after you write to standard out, we would actually call exit underneath. And so there would be data that would get lost if you called process.exit manually. You would see that first kilobyte flushed and actually see that in the terminal, but then the rest would be lost. And this is an issue that has actually plagued us for a lot longer, but we didn't really notice it until now because we thought we made Mac standard out and standard error non-blocking on Macs when IOJS version 1 was released. We didn't. And so this actually just changed, and now it's like, all hell broke loose and everybody was pissed. But it's kind of a couple of different issues in here. So like if you write a bunch of messages to standard out or standard error, and then you throw an error, that error message that gets thrown can actually be blocked and you won't see part of it on some platforms. You can even reproduce on Linux if you write enough to standard out or standard error, but it's a lot easier to do on a Mac. So this is something that we're trying to put a stopgap solution in to make it to where command line applications are not, or command line tools are not just totally broken on Node 6, but there are ways around it. Like, don't use process.exit. I hate saying that, but you can actually set process.exit code to a number and then let the event loop just finish it off, and it will actually exit with that code. So those two issues are definitely similar, but yeah, not fun to deal with. Anybody have any questions on that? Cool. All right, so contributing. I always hear people say they want to get into contributing to it and things like that, and I always wanted to. My first pull request I opened in Node stayed open for 18 months, and that was kind of depressing. Because all it was is when you get an error message. Okay, yeah, this was my claim to fame. So before in Node, if you do HTTP.
Bigger.
Oh yeah, sorry. Still bigger? Yeah. Is that better? You see that?
Always better.
Okay. All right, so. Oh, actually, we don't even have to do that. All right, so we've got the actual what address we try to hit. Yeah, so we try to use 0.10. Oh gosh, I don't even have it. And you don't have tab completion either, or history in the terminal or in the REPL. Okay. Oh, thanks for the helpful error message, Node. Who does that help? If you've got multiple things going on, that doesn't make anything happy. So yeah, that was my first pull request. It sat open for 18 months, and then IOJS, the fork started. I submitted there, it got merged in 2 weeks. So it was a totally different change of pace, and it got me so excited about Node, and that's why I love it now. But one of the coolest things to me is we want more people to contribute. Please help us. Even if you are not a Node expert, even if I'm definitely not a Node expert. Yes, I use Node all day, every day, and I love it more than any other software or language or runtime in the world. Yeah, no. Please come help us. Please, we need it. Anything from documentation updates, giving us help us with issue and pull request triage. Hey, the pull request that fixes this issue got merged. Can we close this? That stuff really helps us. And we're really making a big kick for documentation. We're trying to make that entry point into learning how to use Node easier. It's not that easy right now, especially when you get past the hello world stage. Hey, I'm running this application in production and I've used Node for a year, but something happened and now I have no idea what to do. We need to be able to help people like that. So that's what we're trying to do. We actually have a help repository, Node.js/help on GitHub. Please, people post there, some do. To me, it's a lot better environment than the IRC channel. I feel like it's not as much constant just throwing stuff out there into an abyss. You actually can track it and see how people are progressing and things like that. But if you have questions, ask them there. If you are looking there and you see answers, please help. It really helps everybody. It helps us make Node better. And if you're here, then you've probably used Node in one way or another, and that's what we all want. We want Node to be better. We want it to be stable. We want it to be faster. So every little bit helps. But yeah, contributing. We've started this, well, we didn't just start it, but we've had it for a little while. There's a good first contribution label. You can't see it. Right there. Can you see it now? So yeah, anytime there's, I don't normally use my laptop, so. Oh great, now I cannot. Okay. So yeah, anytime an issue comes up, and it's something that is not necessarily as involved as like rewriting the HTTP module or something like that, we try to add the good first contribution label because like that's a good feeling, you know, like you find an issue, you report the issue, and then you get to fix the issue. Like that's huge. So we want to encourage people, like if you are not familiar with the process that we go through, like please reach out to somebody and ask us, and we'll help, you know, walk you through that. And I believe there's even a mentor available. Yeah, there's a mentor available issue as well. And we don't really add that issue as much as we should, but if you want to get involved and you need a mentor, please reach out to somebody. Or please reach out to me. I'd be happy to help in any way that I can. Like that's, you know, that's what we're all trying to do is make this better. So, oh God. Okay, I'll also tweet the good first contribution issues. So there's a hashtag for it. It's good first contribution. That's pretty clever. Yeah. So please check that out. And if you want to see more about like what's going on, how to get into reading the actual code, this is a great guide that Rich Trott wrote about how to reason about, like when you get, it's an intimidating code base, I'm not gonna lie. You get into it and there's a lot of, you know, you look on GitHub and it's this long, you know, you have to scroll down to even get to the README. This really makes that easier to digest. So I would recommend giving that a look through. And if there are things that you recommend, like, hey, how can we make this contributing process easier? Please open an issue. Let us know. Let us know what that barrier to entry for you was individually, and that really helps us make it easier for people who are not familiar with our processes. So yeah, and I posted my slides. They're on my website. I'll show you after, whatever. No, like you can tweet them or something. Oh yeah, cool. All right, cool. Okay, so that was like the end of, like, these are my slides and I'm gonna read them off to you. Does anybody have any questions or comments and, you know, just want to get a better understanding, or what's up?
So I was looking at the changes in V6, and one of the things that I see in a lot of articles has to do with the performance of module loading. And there's a reference to the performance tables in the Node that's pointed to from the Node repo. There's like a performance workgroup.
Yes, there is.
So they have this set of charts that they have on there that shows you the performance comparisons. Can you kind of go over that if you can? If not, that's cool. But I was looking at one of them and I was trying to figure out which one of those charts, there's like 9 I think, which one of them shows that in V6 the performance of module loading is better than in version 5 or 4, etc.
Okay.
And I thought it was that top right one.
That's the startup right there.
Okay.
Require.
Is that
right
the
here.
one? Okay.
Yeah, so this is the number of operations per second. So that means we can require that many more per second in V6 and in master there.
So V6 is the purple one at the bottom.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and this will maybe make it a little bit easier. Let's see. I'll put it on. So 6, and then we'll do. All right, so in the actual Node repository, that's where we are right now. You can do Node benchmark compare. And this allows us to compare benchmarks from one binary to another. And all it does is it literally just runs them both and like parses the output, but it's really nice. It makes things easier. So like here's the startup. I know this one's fast compared to other ones, but this is like the start of. Of course it doesn't work anymore. Oh. So.
That's cool. I can just go take a look.
God, that really just like messed me up. I'm not gonna lie. So I can check out the benchmarks for. Here, let's do that.
But I think as long as the graphs, if it's that one that you showed us just now, I think that's good enough.
There we go. So this is the version 5 tracking branch right here. This should work. This doesn't work, then yeah, there we go. All right, so it shows like the startup is like 2.8%, so it's like the same. But if we do module, I think it's module loader. Nope. Let's mark. Oh, somebody moved it out. It's module loader. So this will show you like. We're comparing Node 6 to Node 5 right now, and these are just the latest release binaries. This one takes a sec. But yeah, while that's running.
Yeah, that shows clearly that it's,
Yeah, so it shows, you know, it's literally almost twice as fast an actual requirement is. And that's for a lot of different reasons. It's still running. So yeah, we can. It'll take a minute. We can come back after.
I mean, that answers my question. So
Cool.
Thanks.
Glad to hear. What's up?
I hear that it's always talked about how Node.js is this loop that's running really quick, and you send a request and it does things asynchronously, and it's extremely high performance. But it's always emphasized that there's just one loop and that you don't want to slow that thing down. And I'm thinking, okay, so what if I have like 8 CPUs? Can you give an architectural overview of the technique used for making Node run on more than just one core at a time, if in one server? Do you know
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually one that that's a real use case that people run into. So there's a couple of different ways. That's one thing I really like about Node is it's not like Python. Like you can do stuff in more than one way. So with Node, we have a native cluster module that's built in, and what that does is that will spawn child. It'll fork more so than spawn, and then Node sends fork. It'll fork child processes that will share the port, the HTTP port, or like the TCP port, something like that they're listening on, and it just uses IPC between like the main process and the worker processes. That's one way to do it. I personally have not had great luck with the cluster module. I feel like it's not quite there. And so what I typically have always done, I've done this for 5 years and it's really worked well for me, is put something like Nginx or HA proxy in front of it and then just spawn like 4 versions of your process. It does mean that you have to architect a little bit differently because with that approach, you kind of have to move more towards a stateless approach. But, you know, then again, for me, it's always made things easier to do it that way. So I recommend that way. Not everybody does, but yeah, those are 2 different ways. But with the event loop, once you get to the point where you're blocking that event loop, your performance literally is gone. You might as well just restart it at that point. So,
A slight follow-up here.
Sure.
So now we're thinking about what is blocking. So is blocking going to disk? Is blocking going to SSD? Is blocking going into just RAM? RAM being slow compared to your cache? So, I mean, blocking, I guess some people think it's blocking is going to a slow database and taking, whatever. But at what point is blocking? Because to me, it's all blocking.
Sure, and that's a fair point. I probably should have clarified. It's blocking the CPU. With JavaScript being single-threaded, we use libuv. We have a thread pool in libuv that anything that, like, any file system accesses will hit the thread pool. DNS lookups hit the thread pool. So if you're doing a bunch of DNS lookups and you have bad performance in production, look at that. Those kinds of things will actually perform like a synchronous operation, but on a different thread. and then come back and hit the event loop and notify. So CPU blocking is mainly what I'm talking about when I set that. Sure, what's up?
I have a slightly related question because I'm kind of confused about the same thing. So it's clearly one thread for working the event queue, but wouldn't there have to be at least one more thread for handling callbacks and all this other stuff?
There's one thread in your JavaScript code. So Node is going to have more threads underneath, but your JavaScript code is only going to, you're not having to deal with threads in JavaScript. That's when people say it's single threaded, that's more what they're talking about. But there are definitely threads, like I mentioned, for like DNS lookups, file system access, different things like that. You're definitely going to have a thread pool underneath, but on the JavaScript side of things, you just have that single thread.
And you put Nginx on the same box as your Node instances?
Probably not a good idea. I don't know. I've had luck with using, I kind of like to have mine set up where I'm not using more than 4 cores and like have a process for each core and just load up on RAM. But then have like Nginx or I'm more of an HA proxy fan. Throw that like in the same data center or, whatever, and just proxy directly from there.
So Nginx is, you have the node listening on different ports on the same box, and Nginx is just hitting various ports.
Mm-hmm. It's worked well for me.
Sort of along those lines, has there been any more talk about getting something like web workers supported by Node? I know I've seen things like that in the past.
Yes, there's a pull request still open for workers, and those workers are kind of like web workers. They're kind of like a child process that gets spawned, but it's not really a child process that gets spawned. It was a really big pull request that people went through and reviewed, but it was so much code and so invasive that nobody has come to agreement. And like Node is very consensus based. If somebody objects, if a collaborator objects and a consensus cannot be made, then it goes up to the CTC, and the CTC will either, punt it back to GitHub, or they will make a decision and say, this is how we're going to do it. And nobody has been able to really get in and review that pull request as well as it would be needed to land that. It's kind of disappointing in my opinion, because I've actually pulled it down and used it. It's really cool. The kinds of things that you can do. It's like cluster for not cluster stuff. It's kind of the best way I can explain it. But you kind of use like worker processes, which is nice without having the overhead of spawning like extra child processes. So, somebody back there have a question? Oh, cool.
I have a question.
What's up?
Yeah, I'm just curious to hear a little more about, like, I would guess that there are probably some Google Chrome folks that are involved in the CTC or in the process somehow, right?
Yes.
So I'm just curious how you guys work with maybe the V8 Chrome team, or if there's communication, how that works.
Yes, actually, okay, so there is, I think Elise got onboarded when I did. He works at Google on their integration with like cloud platform, or cloud, maybe it's whichever one you can like spawn a service is easy. I can't remember which one it is. But he's been a great liaison between like the core team and the people at V8. We've also gotten to the point now where, like, I think it was last month, we had a face-to-face between some people on the CTC, some people from V8, some people from Chakra, and we're trying to make it where being engine agnostic is something that's possible in Node. And so V8 has actually been, I don't want to say helping do that, but they've definitely been helpful in their ways that they've been doing that kind of stuff. And so Ali's actually been helping a lot with the Chrome debugging for Node, things like that. But the communication now between Node and V8 and the different JavaScript engines has definitely improved over the past year, I'd say, to the point where we're all really trying to work together and make sure we're not breaking something because it's different than what you would expect in Node versus in the browser, so that kind of stuff.
Is there anything in V8 that originated from something Node asked for, or does it all flow from V8 into Node?
Yeah, there was one case that I remember off the top of my head. V8 had the ability to abort and cause a core dump when an uncaught exception occurred, but you could not. That didn't work with Node domains. I don't know if you're familiar with domains. Domains are like something that need to die and go away and never come back. They're so invasive to the code base, but when you're in a domain and that happens, we have to make sure that we're at like the right place in the stack to be able to get a correct core dump that can actually be viewed in like LLDB or something like that. So we had to implement a hook where we could set that depending on where we were in that domain, and it got landed and backported to us in like 7 or 8 days. So they've been very, very helpful to the point where now V8 even, every change that goes in, there's a build bot that runs a version of V8 on Node. So they run Node tests now, which is a really huge step and really exciting, seeing how, you know, all the different integrations are coming together, especially with the debugger now. It's really sweet. I was actually going to show a little demo after that, so. Docker. Cool. What's up?
You know, given all the breaking changes, is there a list of like polyfill libraries or modules anywhere? Because I know I've seen a couple floating around. My use case was I was one of those bad file exist users, and I know that there are polyfills out there for that. But is there any like central location for kind of mapping out how you would go about migrating from one environment to another?
No, typically when we make a breaking change as extreme as like, hey, don't use fs.exist anymore, there's a reason for it. So like in that case, it's always going to be a race condition. So you can check that this file exists, and it may exist at that time, but when we go to actually read it, it may not exist. So you might as well just try to read it once and check for ENO, ENT error, you know, that kind of stuff. But I don't think there's a centralized location for something like that. That may be a really good idea. Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, a wiki page. The wiki pages are free to, I mean, anybody can, you know, go in and mess with those. Please don't terrorize the ones that we've worked really hard on. I don't know if I should have said that or not, but yeah. No, the wiki is very useful, and people will like to go to the wiki. So, you know, if you have ideas about that, we're definitely all ears.
So it's more of a crowd thing, but I'm looking at starting a new Node project pretty soon here. And so if Express is not really the way to go anymore, I'd love to hear about that. And also interested in Postgres, ORM or drivers or whatever. So if anybody has recommendations, find me or if they're quick, shout them out.
Just a module is actually pretty good for Postgres.
Okay.
That's what we
I would
use.
recommend that one.
Okay.
And I've been really happy with Cola lately compared to Express.
Okay.
I know we were supposed to do a lightning talk on Happy tonight, but Ted wasn't able to make it. So, but I know if you maybe post in the Slack channel or something, a lot of people have different experience with different.
I was gonna say too, for Express, I don't know if anybody knows, but the Express project is an incubator project in the Node Foundation now. So things are gonna start moving a lot better on that, so.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
I was just saying that for Express, in terms of Express, the project, the open source project, which is kind of stewarded by Strongloop now, they're actually an incubator project for the Node.js Foundation. So they're going to start organizing, or they've already started organizing that a lot more. So things should get a lot better for Express. But yeah, definitely Happy's another.
Yeah, to speak more on that point on the foundation side, we're trying to make it so we move that to more of a consensus seeking model like Node, the Node Core project does.
And there's a lot of mentors from the Node Foundation that are sitting on the Express incubator project. as well,
Yeah.
So.
For sure.
So what's the issue with Node? Sorry, I missed that.
With
What's the issue with Express?
there's no issue necessarily. It's a little slow, but
No issue.
You said Colo or Colam? Okay.
then don't you have to use like promises and generators?
Generator.
Oh.
That was my first reaction too, but getting into it, I was really amazed at how fast I was able to get stuff done. Yeah, a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah, generator can't be optimized though.
What do you like, Evan?
I use callbacks. I live and die by callbacks. I love them. We do not have a single promise on the back end at help.com. And there's a reason for it. It's not just because I can't stand them. We use core dumps to, like, that's how we debug stuff when things happen in production. And when you use a promise, it kind of messes that up. So, yeah. I don't know. That's a.
So you enjoy the pyramid of doom?
I've seen promise hell worse than I've seen callback hell. Yeah. I don't know. If you are writing functional if you're writing functional JavaScript and using promises and you're actually catching your errors and things like that, then, use what works. But I've seen so much code that uses promises that are not, they're just expecting everything to work with no error handling that, like, you can't debug anything. You have to put console.logs in there everywhere. And so that's just my personal thing, take it for what you want, because there's definitely people out there who use promises in production that have no problems. Yeah. So, yeah, there's the questions. So to touch on this, we are hiring. We've got like a bunch of jobs open. Come work on Node stuff, or we do have some integration positions open as well. Not necessarily Node specific, but most of our backend services are going to be using Node, unless Node doesn't work for it. So there's actually a link on here, and if you click on that, it'll take you to the job page. So check that out. There any more questions? I was going to do a little demo after too. So,
Sorry, I need to ask one more. How do you handle crashes and like throttling and things like that? Is that still through Nginx, or say if you have like 4 Node instances deployed on one box, how are you making sure that they stay going?
There's lots of different ways you can do it. I think that we use Kubernetes to restart them. I've used like homegrown solutions. I've used forever. I've used Supervisor. Really, you just use what works and doesn't overcomplicate your deployment. But as far as crashing goes, I'm a big fan of, like, if something goes wrong, like, I want to know about it. So if something goes wrong, I want the process to crash. I don't know. There's kind of two sides to that fence, but that's what works well for me. I want a process that, like, spins up really, really fast, and when it dies, it can spin up really, really fast again. But there's definitely different approaches you can take.
Do you use Docker?
We are using Docker, yes. It's okay. I'm getting better at it.
Are you gonna use the Docker for Mac app when it comes out?
Yeah, I actually
That was the upgrade that came with Screen.
I somehow got beta access to it, and it's a lot better now. Before it was like, let me spend 45 minutes trying to figure out how to get this Docker container running. But now it definitely makes it more seamless for Macs anyways. I really like it, and I signed up for it and got that token or whatever in 2 days. So I would definitely recommend trying that. Cool. Well, there's one other thing I want to show. The actual, like, dev tools in, like, working. So, all right. I got a benchmark here. This is just kind of show, like, the different kinds of things you can see. All right. So this is with the branch that I'll show you the link to the pull request, but this is for, like, integrating the Chrome dev tools into Node.
Is that in any way related to the Node inspector?
Okay, Node Inspector uses the really, really old V8 debugging protocol. This is a new protocol that Chrome and all the Chrome products and V8 have been using for like 4 or 5 years now. 2010, I think, is when they said it became stable. They have not made a backwards incompatible change since 2010, was what somebody who worked on it told me today. So that was pretty exciting to me. But this is something that will be available to hook into like WebStorm or VS Code, things like that, transparently, without having to learn a new protocol. Like this is a protocol that Chrome already uses.
Right. Is there, I mean, does anybody know of any other debuggers other than Node Inspector or this upcoming one? Are there any others that you know of?
Node has an internal debugger as well.
Right.
And then there's various tools like for, I don't know, I guess this is like the JavaScript debugging side, but then there's also like there's a group of people who like to do the core analysis. You can use things like LLDB for that. MDB is one. It's a SmartOS specific one, but you can like take a core dump from a Linux machine and load it on to that SmartOS box and run it through MDB, and you'll be able to like actually trace back and see your stack and things like that. It's really cool.
What's that SmartOS tool?
MDB.
Oh, MDB, okay.
Yeah, it's. I don't know where it is. If you search for it, you should be able to find. If you just Google for it, and there should be like some lots of Joyent tutorials on it. So this is the Chrome debugger right here. Oh, we've actually got sources in here, and so we have Node core. These are all core files that have.
Bigger?
Do what?
Bigger.
Oh yeah. I'm really bad at this. I'm so sorry, y'all. Is that better? Is it still? Is that? That's like what size I use at home. It's great. So yeah, you can like set benchmarks set breakpoints in here, and like these core files, which is really cool because these are actually compiled into the Node binary. Then we can look at, we've got like our stuff that is here. So we can set benchmarks, whatever. But let's go to a profile. Let's take a CPU profile. It's still a pull request. Sorry.
That's a disclaimer.
I didn't pause it. Let's try this again. No.
Does it need the debug break flag in the call?
It shouldn't.
Okay.
It didn't when I tried it earlier. Yeah, there it died. Let's try this again. Maybe it does need a debug break flag. I didn't use it before. Oh well. I feel really bad. It's not working right now. I'm so sorry. I'll get it working and I'll post a video of it, I promise, okay? It's like I was telling people I work with before, like, yeah, I'm gonna try to do it live. Yeah, it didn't work this time. So, sorry. But anybody who wants to see that pull request, if you go to the Node repo, it's actually the easiest way is to look at the V8 inspector label. Oh wait, it's totally not there anymore. No, it's open. It just doesn't have that label anymore. It's number 6792. But yeah, it's cool. You can pull it down, and there's lots of interesting stuff that you can do with it. You can essentially do most of the stuff that you can do with Node Inspector without having to use Node Inspector.
Oh,
It's just built in.
It's a debugger label now, I think.
Yeah. So there's lots of cool things that we could do in the future on this, is like tying into node specifics for profiling and things like that. And I think that's kind of the direction that we're wanting to go, as well as have like a protocol that like all debuggers can use. So, you know, you can switch from using the, you know, WebStorm or Atom or VS Code or whatever you want. But yeah, does anybody have any other questions?
Does this support source maps?
I think it does, actually.
Yeah, it claims to.
Yeah. I personally have not tried it with source maps. I don't transpile, but yeah, it's supposed to. More or less, most of the stuff that you can do, like in Chrome, I mean, you're using Chrome, but we're getting most of the things that, most of the debugging abilities that Chrome has. So it's exciting. Anybody else? Cool. Well, yeah, y'all please, like I said, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or are interested in contributing. Like, that's what we want. And if you're looking for a job, let us know. Thanks.
Thanks, Evan. So we have one lightning talk. Corey, do you need a laptop or?
No.
Okay. And Evan told me he's going to stick around afterwards and head to Buffalo Billiards. So if anyone's shy and wants to wait till afterwards to ask him a question or whatever, you can do that as well. So Corey is going to tell us about his project.
Yeah, just a little bit out of curiosity, who was here last month? Anybody? All right, so because I did a little talk on this last month as well. So I made NVM for Windows, which, how many people use NVM, either the one for Mac or for Windows? All right. So, and I don't know if you saw, Evan went through it fairly quick, but he was using N to make some switches between the different versions. And that's really kind of the concept behind all these different projects, right, is to manage different versions of Node on your laptop, or in some cases on, like if you use Travis, you can see that NVM for OS X is used there. Really that's really what this is all about. And so I actually went over to Monaco's meetup a couple of nights ago, and he had mentioned that there's a TSC thing out right now for integrating or bringing NVM in under the Node Foundation, which I saw your name on that list too, Evan. So Brian asked me to talk about this a little bit because I took a look at it and made a big rant of a post out there. And so what I really wanted to do is just kind of describe the experience of managing versions, specifically with Windows, because it's quite a bit different than really any Unix-based architecture. And there's a lot of stuff that people don't really think about involved with it. So just in general, like there's a couple of issues, and by the way, I would love feedback from people because I'm taking this NVM for Windows and making it cross-platform. So I guess real quick background is it's not written in Node at all. It doesn't have anything to do with it. It's written 100% in Go. And the whole reason for that was because of dependency management. Some of the other projects and actually, if you have this up, could you scroll to the bottom? There's all the way. Yeah, so there's obviously some other alternatives out here. Like NVMW was actually what I had used before making NVM for Windows, and the only problem that I had with that, it was a great tool, but the only problem I had was that it was using batch files. And it was using Node itself to install Node. And so as you move from one version to another, there could be changes. That happened a lot in the 10.x series. So long story short is it's kind of hard to manage versions with the thing that you are managing versions with. Yeah, it's kind of just this weird mental cycle there. So that's why I ultimately went with Go. And that's kind of the big challenge with version management in general is just the dependencies that you have to have, because when you're working with different versions of Node itself becomes kind of the data. It's not like, when you make an application, you save your data off somewhere. But when you're creating an installer that's going to install other things, you have issues like where does that go on the operating system? So like in Windows, does that go into the user's profile? Does that go into a system profile? Where does that stuff end up? And how does that affect, like what kind of permissions do you need as an end user? And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but it's just there's a lot of headspace around the dependencies of this stuff. The other thing that I've kind of come across a lot is installation and deployments of Node in general. Obviously, you can do it one version at a time, but when you're dealing with something like multiple versions, NVM has been great as far as like Unix goes and Linux in general. But with Windows, that's kind of a whole different ballgame because most enterprises are still using Windows. I mean, a lot of people are moving into Mac-oriented architectures, but when you start talking about how do I distribute this to a team of developers when my team is 1,000 people, that's a whole lot different than just a couple of people, installing it on their own. That's when you get into corporate governance and policies around like, who's allowed to install what on their laptop. And that's something that I've found to be kind of interesting with the whole NVM for Windows situation is because I've had a lot of people that have come to me and said, hey, can I get a silent installer for this? Because if you go and download this right now, there's an actual GUI installer, so you push a couple of buttons and next thing you know, you got NVM for Windows running on your Windows machine. And that's a whole lot different than executing a batch file or using Homebrew or something of that nature. But when you get into the enterprise, trying to deploy that through Active Directory is a whole different ball of wax. And that can be a real challenge based on just the permissions that are required to install something and then the permissions required to actually run some of this stuff. So I know that's a lot. I'm kind of whizzing through this stuff. But that also leads to another concern with version management, which is when do you update the version manager itself? So like, that, hey, there's a new awesome version of Node out. I want to go use it, okay? NVM update or NVM install, 6.2.0. That's great, but what happens when you need to actually update NVM? And there's not really a whole lot out there right now that does the automatic updating of things. And that's kind of why I wrote this in Go, because Go has pretty good support for automatic updates. And again, being able to do that across different platforms is, to me, interesting. And then what were my other points here? So that's kind of, I whizzed through that, and I don't expect everybody to really understand all those little problems, and that wasn't really what I wanted to focus on. The bigger questions, I think, that came from my experience with creating this and with using the other tools is that there are standards that are kind of emerging, and there's a split in how version management is used. I think the biggest split, or at least what I've seen, is there are people looking to manage versions in a very simplistic manner. Like, just switch my version of Node already. Like I want to be able to test against 5 and 6, but I also need to go back and test against 10 and 12. Okay, so I'm just going to switch over and use whatever version I'm going to use. And that's kind of the approach that I took. But then there's a lot of folks that come from the Unix side of things with the original NVM. And that has things like an NVM RC file where you can kind of cherry pick which version of Node you want to use. And that gets into a lot of workflow and how are you developing your apps with Node. And so there's a fine line there, right? Like, do you manage just the versions, or do you start injecting opinions on how you develop code into your version management? And that kind of gets into this really kind of this rat's nest, that unravels itself based on that. So like the one big issue that I saw is I've got a couple of users that are enterprise users that use roaming profiles. Anybody here stuck on roaming profiles at their work? No? I'm grateful for all of you. So roaming profiles on Windows basically will copy everything that's in the user directory from one machine to another. It's something that's been around for ages. It's typically integrated through Active Directory. Lots of policies going on with that. But I had one guy that had a couple of versions of Node installed and a whole bunch of global Node modules installed. And so the way that NVM for Windows works is when you install it, it will create it's basically a symlink in your program files. And the advantage to that is that when you install a new version of Node, it's just dumping it into another directory in your user profile. So then when you make the switch, it just changes, it says, hey, symlink, go point to this version or go point to that version. And it's been really effective, except for these roaming profiles. Because this guy, I don't know exactly how many modules he had in there, but he was telling me that between several versions of Node and the fact that Node is keeping all of the NPM modules in the same installation base, all that stuff for every version of Node with every module that he had was being copied over from machine to machine. It took him 30 minutes to boot up. So just because he had a lot of modules, right? So that's not really in my mind a Node thing. That's kind of like an NPM thing, which there's been a lot of changes with that too, over the last couple of years. But it just kind of highlights a bigger problem with managing, which version of Node you're using and how different it can be from one operating system to another. So yeah, I think that was it on the major issues. I guess the other issues, and I'd be very curious for anybody, like just feedback on this, but I've noticed a lot of people interested in system-wide Node versus terminal Node. And what I mean by that is when you install NVM for Windows, it will immediately when you boot up any terminal, any console that you open up, it's going to run the same version. So if you were to type in NVM use 6.2.0, okay, you can open up another terminal and that's going to be running 6.2.0. You change it in any terminal and it cascades. That's what I mean by system-wide. Some of the other version managers will allow you to use a particular instance, like one version of Node in one terminal and another version in another. And there's a lot of ramifications to how that's actually implemented behind the scenes. So if anybody has an opinion on that, I'm really curious, just because it's something that I'm working on right now. But yeah, that's kind of about it. I really just wanted to highlight some of the challenges and bring some awareness more to it, just to what goes on and where's the line drawn between what does a version manager do versus what do you do as a developer, and some of the challenges around that. Just because it's something that I've been seeing a lot lately. This project in particular has gone, it's kind of skyrocketed in the last few months. There's 40,000 users now. It was 30,000 last month. I think that's probably a low number just due to the number of corporate users that's kind of going out through, being basically installed for people on their laptops and everything. So I don't know the exact numbers, but I have seen a lot of growth there. So I know that it's something that's not just near and dear to me, it's obviously near and dear to a lot of people. So that's really all I've got. This is kind of something that I've been working on whenever I have spare time. And if you have any feedback or interest or anything, I'm looking for people to help out with it as well. So if you want to get your hands dirty in some Go and play with Node at the same time, let me know. But that's about it. So, do you want to say anything else? Or?
Yeah. Any questions for Corey?
Yep.
When you move towards a more multi-platform support, are you going to consider changing the name?
Yes. That's a great yes. So the whole reason for NVM originally was just to try to not have confusion with the command line tool, but I haven't 100% settled on this, but it'll probably be NVS instead, Node Version Switcher or something along those lines, to try to focus a little bit more on at least that more minimalistic concept. So yeah, it's not going to be NVM Windows anymore. Open to ideas for names too. So.
Cool. And one more question, and then Corey is actually going to hang around afterwards too if anyone has any other questions you can think of.
What was the state of your silent installer?
I'm sorry?
What was the state of your silent installer?
The state of it, that's a great question. There's not like any, I haven't done anything official. There is a no setup zip file that you can download and run that way, but it kind of, actually if you can go to the wiki, I think it'll be in there. Either the build yourself link on the right. Yeah, so there's some simple instructions here. You could do it that way. There have been a couple of folks that have offered to make a chocolatey package. I set that up, but haven't really had a whole lot of feedback, and frankly, I haven't had much time. So there's nothing with that. But as far as going forward, I'm hoping to get an MSI for at least for Windows deployed, so that we can do silent installs that way. I haven't thought 100% about how I'm going to do that with the other operating systems yet. But that's basically the state of it at this point. Anything else?
Cool.
Nope.
Thanks,
All right, cool.
So just a couple of real quick things and then we're done. So that was a lightning talk. That was longer than most lightning talks because Corey actually is a co-organizer and he speaks sometimes, so he's used to it. But like I said before, if you have even a 3 to 5 minute thing on a topic, we're always looking for people. And don't forget to pick up the parking card if you did park here. And real quick, an informal poll. How many people have actually contributed any amount of code to an open source project? Raise your hand. So how many people have actually hosted their own open source project that other people can use? So not that many. So of the people who haven't done that, I'm just kind of curious. We don't have to like talk about it now, I guess, but if anyone wants to come up to me afterwards, I'm interested in learning more. If it's a matter of people not knowing how to get started, or if there's just not interest, or if you just don't have time because you're paying your bills. Because in a group like this, I would actually hope to maybe see more hands up. So maybe a future discussion topic. So I'm interested if anyone wants to give me feedback on that. Kind of goes to Evan's point too when he was talking about contributing. So definitely pick up your parking card and head over to Buffalo Billiards if you're interested. And thanks for coming out.
What up, Chris? How was Club?
No, I don't know. I just think in general she's
I told my buddy who works at Slack and sent it along. I put in a good word for
no, it's the worst.
It'd be like a
Oh, hey. ¿Qué pasó? Yeah, that's the only exception. Also, I guess Dave.
He looks like she's looking for a mysterious guy with understanding eyes and
I've been using Flutter.
just my
Yeah, the JavaScript one is using a linter is definitely taking a good approach to testing. In general, in programming, JavaScript kind of have good unit testing strategy.
How do you feel?
You're like a pretty decent code.
I really don't know anything yet.
I'm going back to Florida.
Wow.
The report date for my bicycle ticket.
nice.
You should know like in December.
You should figure that out before you go.
Are you coming back to Austin?
I feel like there's Sean running his ed tech meetup right across the hall.
Nice, nice. He would.
What's that?
It's like tech education.
Good.
Anybody who's in education and
We missed the lake house.
Finding an entry point.
So, I showed up on Sunday, and if you notice in the Slack, it said show up anytime after 5 for food and drinks, and possibly a luau. That was like word for word what it said. So I told him, I was like, hey, I'm gonna be there like 6. And he's like, oh, I'm at like a restaurant on the lake, so I'll be back in a little while. So I like left half an hour later, got there at 6:30, and Jack showed up. Or like I asked him where to park, and he parked like 2 miles away from the house.
Oh, really?
And then yeah, he probably met that. So then I'm like, I walked to the house and I'm about to get there, and Jack pulls up behind me. So house was dark, he gets one of the spots, and so couldn't figure out where the fucking house was for like a good 30 minutes. We're like trying to call Matt and figure out where it was. He won't pick up his phone, but he'll text back. Like obviously he's been day drinking on the boat for a while, so I can't blame him. Like I'm not mad. But finally see PJ sitting alone on the dock. So I'm like, oh, that's where we're supposed to be. So PJ's been there for over an hour, almost an hour and a half. And I get to the dock with Jack. We wait for at least an hour, if not an hour and a half, for Matt to finally get back. And he gets back with his friends that he was out on the boat with. And we're like, hey, what's up, Andy? What's up? And he goes there. It's like, hey, I'm gonna get down Matt's parents. They don't even invite us inside. So we're just like still standing outside, sitting there on PJ's waiting for Matt. And so we were like, you know what? Let's just fucking leave. Like it was just awkward and everything. Not mad about it. It was awkward. It kind of just seemed like it was more like Matt hanging out with his parents and his friends than the house for making sure people could come chill.
See, I didn't meet Matt's parents. I just saw the older lady who acted like she was
I always throw
asking.
this out.
Yeah, I met her. She made PJ move his car, and she was pretty mad about it.
Yeah.
Even though Matt told PJ to park exactly where he was parked.
Yeah, that's been the same thing that happened.
You parked next to
Oh, so he definitely knew that it was supposed to park.
Yeah, I love that because I was like,
Just travel.
And I mean, really, the only difference
Parked up by the trash
really
cans.
is if you're doing, like, obviously, some
Matt's still not
I still don't know.
She was not happy.
Like, was I in a bad spot, or were you in shade in bad spots? I just don't know.
Yeah, I would have come out on Monday or Tuesday, but I had to
it opens for stuff. Generally speaking,
It's a good time. Spend a lot of time on a boat.
some things have
he's pretty separate.
My legs are
Yeah.
It was nice. I thought it was quite cool.
Yeah, he says he's gonna take it out again. Tomorrow, maybe?
I don't think he's gonna wait for it tomorrow.
I mean, I can't wait for it, so I don't care.
Well, so Matt's got like an A cup and a C cup.
Yeah, his left peg is like giant. Like he hurt himself.
Yeah, from when he was doing that.
He like tore his pec or something. He was should wear a bra on that one side.
He was doing like one arm wakeboarding and backflips. Yeah. Apparently that was quite the impulse.
Probably the backflip. Yeah, when you stretch like that.
I don't know if he did any one-arm backflips. I know he did one arm and he did something.
I think that's what's going on.
But yeah, any sort of flip, yeah.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah, he did several backflips. So.
that's not as common yet, but I think that's going to be.
Maybe it's just a crash.
You know more about wakeboarding than I do.
Only been a few times.
Got in the water. Briefly.
I think got in the water,
I
realized
jumped
it was
in the
very
water
cold.
and I was like, oh fuck.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I jumped in the water like first time and I was like, oh, I can't breathe. Like I was like, I got out like, alright, let's try again. It was cool.
like there.
I put my legs in and I was sitting on the dock. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So
If you would be interested in something like that, then.
you like,
So, yeah.
okay, so digital assets are kind of a challenge. Digital rights management. Piracy. So, on the consulting side, they do like more traditional consulting. And then we can do one of three things. We can do
Yeah, I'm not that
build a full custom
familiar
app
with
for
it.
them, which we're doing
Right,
right now.
it's
It's a forecasting app. We can create a custom UI to sit on the notification that we have done.
You don't need to apply to more jobs. You need to apply to the right jobs.
We're 12.
I'd love to
The company actually exists in Austin.
But this is so different.
and they have the digital asset management product, but they do no customization themselves. So I've recommended us to our clients to use for customization and implementation. We have some secret sauce from our
I gotta start cleaning stuff up here so we can
really quickly and let us
So y'all meet once a month?
Yeah, every fourth Wednesday, except next month, we had a conflict. It's generally every fourth Wednesday.
Yeah, have a great night.
Good. That's what's up.
Brian.
Patrick. Nice to meet you. On presentation. Sorry for walking in late through the side door.
Not a super formal thing.
Yeah. And I saw your last slide about maker prep. I'm actually the instructor for that maker prep class.
Nice. Should have spoken up.
I was almost going to. Only one question.
Yeah. Yeah, I talked to Sean, who was right across the way. Running that one.
EdTech Austin one.
Yeah.
In our last staff meeting, he was actually like, yeah, I ran EdTech Austin while the season's going on. You should not go to EdTech Austin. Y'all should come over here. So
I'd love to go, but the EdTech Austin meetup is always going on at the same time, so I don't.
Yeah.
There's always a meetup going on. You know, there's so many meetups nowadays. And yeah. Cool. Thanks for stopping by. What you get to, yeah. You guys all good?
Nope.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it was just more of a general question.
Yeah.
Because I don't even know if you can just, talk and basically know your stuff.
I can take it.
Yeah. So like, you know, I think they don't really tell you what they've done, like you think exactly what they've done. Yes, they have the tools. Apply for work to Texas State. And so you go to these like Indeed or something, and like, oh yes, a junior software engineer. Yeah, that's could be me. And it's like, you know, needs 3 to 5 years of this, you know, X amount of years in this language, and must know, you know, this framework, these certain, you know, requirements, and like always it's like I'll get like 3 of the 5, and then I'm like, okay, I guess I won't apply. And
It shouldn't stop you. I mean, I can tell you, you know, not only as from your perspective as a developer, job seeker, but also as a perspective of a hirer. I've been on that side of the table before many times. And number one, especially in Austin, it's really hard to hire people. You know, everyone puts their 10 bullet points or whatever, but very rarely does the guy walk in who meets all 10 bullet points. Almost never. And as a person looking to hire, usually I'm going out trying to find people, and it's really hard to find people. So don't write off the fact that you may only fit half the requirements, but they may decide that that's good enough, or they may decide that the position they had in mind maybe doesn't have to be quite the same as what they wrote up if you're the right person for it. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that, number one. Number two, and this, everyone says this, but it really is true, that it's much less about the specific skills you have than about your ability to think on your own and get new skills quickly and that kind of stuff. I mean, whether or not you know React.js is not as relevant to me as if you tell me, well, I don't know React, but I do know Angular pretty well, and I've looked into React, and you know, it seems similar in some ways and different in some ways, and I feel very confident that I can pick it up, but I don't happen to have any experience with it, right? And if someone walks in and says that, I'm like, okay, well, that's cool, right? Like, as long as I believe that you're a smart guy, that you have technical skills in a related area or whatever, then I mean, it's really not a problem to me, to most employers. So that's really the key, is just like, don't worry about the specific skills, just look for stuff that's in the area that you're interested in, that maybe is related to things that you're interested in. And you never know, right? And some employers may say, well, I really want someone with React, but you know what? No one else applies that's even close. This guy is at least in the ballpark, so you know, maybe we'll spend 2 weeks getting him up to speed and call it good, right? I mean, you never know what they're thinking. So I definitely, like, your strategy, if you're looking for a job, should be to over apply. I mean, it cannot hurt. The worst thing that can happen is they tell you no, right?
Yeah.
So it should not stop you from applying, right? So that's the way I would look at it. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I just always thought that, like, you know, I mean, these people, they're working, so it's like, I don't know, if they're looking for these things, I'm gonna, like, you know, go in there and waste their time.
I mean, it's their job as interviewers and employers to figure that out. It's your job to just show up and say, this is what I can do, and this is what I can learn, and I'm a smart guy, and whatever your attributes are that the way you sell yourself as a developer. And there's either a match or there's not. But I mean, it's not your job to decide for them if you're a good fit, right? 'Cause you never know what they're looking for. You never know what kind of training they have, what kind of mentors they may have. But it's also, there's a huge difference in expectation. If you're hiring a junior developer just out of school versus someone with 5 or 10 years experience, there's a big difference in your expectation as well, right? So if I'm specifically interviewing you and I know you're a recent grad, you haven't had a lot of on-the-job experience necessarily, then I'm going to view you in that context, right? I'm not going to expect you to be the perfect candidate. So I'm going to expect you to be an intelligent person who I believe can pick up the things that you don't know today. And as long as I believe that, and there's a good match and all the other things that I'm looking for, then it's fine.
I think that, so this, I guess the follow-up.
And I've hired people like that. I've hired people before. I've actually hired people that didn't necessarily fit exactly what I thought I wanted to hire. But, you don't hardly ever get the perfect candidate. So you get to pick and choose among the people who are good enough for what you need, and who are a good fit personality-wise, and all the other things that go into it.
And it's a follow-up question. It's also an answer to that question you had right up about, because I contributed to open source once, and it was just documentation. It was just, I was not comfortable with the stuff, so I was like, well, I'll contribute any way I can. The reason why I don't, the only reason why I don't do a project of my own is one, like, I'm always like the last person. Like, I'll be like, oh, that's a great idea, and then I'll look at it and there's like 50 projects that's already doing it, and I'm like, oh, wow. And then also, like, I'm not 100% confident in my skills to like start something. This is it. Come join me on my thing.
Well, the key to it really is don't start a project hoping people are going to come find it and help you or whatever. Like, start a project that you care about. And even if there is other stuff out there, that's not really as relevant if you think that you can add something different, or if just the experience of building it yourself would be beneficial to you or enjoyable. I mean, that's really enough a lot of times. So, because we're not necessarily saying go out and make something that everyone in the world has to be able to use, right? There's very few people that really do that. So, there's stuff, like I have a few little things out there that are like just very small. Like as an example, I use HipChat, if you're familiar with HipChat. And so in the previous version, it's actually I think in Electron app. I mentioned Electron in my talk.
Oh yeah, no, I saved it on my.
Yeah, I think HipChat actually is an Electron app. I know for a fact it's based on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then they just wrapped in a native client. And so in version 3, when they shipped it, you actually could go into the package and find the CSS file that it used and tweak it manually and like customize the CSS for the back client.
Yeah.
And when they released some version of it, they like totally revamped the styles, and I didn't like all the changes that they made. And so I created a repo on GitHub, and all it was taking their CSS file, and I made some modifications to it to make it work better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I posted
it. Does look
it.
terrible.
Yeah, and it's actually gotten better, but the version was like 3.0 or some version that they sort of was not that good. And what I did wasn't even that much. It was like 15 or 20 lines of CSS that I customized or whatever, and I posted it out there. And I did it just for myself. But I had like 10 or 15 or 20 people star it. They found it through search and used it, I guess. And it's like, it doesn't matter in any way other than it's just kind of cool to be able to have written code that someone else found useful, right? That's the only reason I did it. Like, if one other person finds this useful, then it's worth posting, right? Because it doesn't take, you know, you just post it, push it up to GitHub, make it public, and you're done, right? There's not that much to it. For that example. And so, just the other example I'll tell you is one of the developers on my team, we had to do something in Node. It's not detailed or important, but he was going to write this little, very short module to do like it was basically a library that we were using. He wanted to override it to like add something to it, right? So not that. And so he pushed that change that we made to our internal code. And I said, hey man, that seems like something that would be useful. Like if anyone else is using that library that wants to do the same thing you're doing, like it could be kind of useful. He was like, oh, well, yeah, I never really thought about that. And I said, yeah, why don't you like redo it a little bit so that it's reusable, and we'll drop it in NPM, and you never know, like some people might find it useful. So he did that, and it's literally like 50 lines of code, right? It's a small module, but it gets downloaded now like 1,000 times a week. Just because you know a lot of people use the library that we overwrote, and I guess enough people have that same need that they just keep finding it and keep using it. And so that's just another example of something like we didn't even think of that as an open source project, but it made sense because it was just a reusable piece of code. And so we just wrapped it up, made it available, and people started using it. And so, you know, it's easier to do than you might think, right? Like writing an open source project doesn't have to be sitting down and writing like Express.js, right? It can be these small pieces of functionality that people find useful. So keep that in mind.
Yeah,
You can start very small and kind of go from there.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your name again?
Matt.
Matt?
Yeah. Yeah. I just this is my first meeting. I was like, I figured, you know, what better way to once you graduated to start networking.
Yeah, for sure.
Like Chris, I've this fifth meetup in like
yeah, and
6
actually,
days.
are you on the Slack channel?
Yeah.
So have you? Because you can post. There's like a connections channel in there that's specifically like people looking for jobs or anything else. If you want to just
I did not know that.
So feel free to just drop a comment anywhere in there and just say, hey, I'm looking for whatever. Because you never know who might have connections that'll help you out.
Yeah. Awesome. No, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm actually using Lambda to process those emails.
Yeah.
It doesn't really
Yeah, that's fine. My biggest issue with JavaScript is the whole type language involved. So you can mimic that like with JavaScript pretty easily.
So you don't have to go through.
Like I've mimicked classes
Figure out all the files.
for years,
You
but
either
I'll
have
have like unions on properties and stuff like that to
Sublime or Atom or whatever
Are you
you're
a JavaScript?
or you have to
Fuerte, senado magistrado.